que preservamos e os futuros que idealizamos. Cultura transcende barreiras, conecta corações, transforma realidades. Acreditar na energia que vem da cultura é acreditar que as histórias transformam os palcos, os ritmos e os cantos desse país. São nessas histórias que encontramos a alma e a diversidade de um povo. Celebramos essa diversidade, celebramos cada cor, cada voz, cada sorriso e cada emoção. A cultura é reflexo dos nossos sonhos. Investimos nesses sonhos há mais de 60 anos, porque acreditamos que a energia que vem da gente é a energia que impulsiona vidas. Shell, energia que vem da cultura. Onde tem cultura, há bagunça. Um poder criativo que nasce dos palcos, orquestras, das artes, das ruas e dos museus. Onde tem cultura, há bagunça. Um poder criativo que nasce dos palcos, orquestras, das artes, das ruas e dos museus. Na valorização das diversas identidades brasileiras e na preservação de memórias. Onde toca um instrumento, um futuro desperta. Nas trocas de saberes, sonhos e oportunidades se concretizam. Dos projetos que todo mundo conhece, aos que todo mundo precisa conhecer. É valorizando a cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos. Instituto Cultural Vale.
Dizer que o Brasil é gigante não é nenhum exagero, mas um país desse tamanho não se move sozinho. Ele conta com mais de 200 milhões de gigantes, como eu e você. Gigantes que saem cedo de casa todos os dias, com força, dedicação, coragem, pelos trilhos, estradas ou aeroportos. Gigantes que não diminuem diante dos desafios, que não têm medo de distâncias, nem do longo caminho até os sonhos acontecerem. Por isso, só uma gigante como a CCE poderia estar ao lado dos brasileiros no desafio de mover este país. CCE, 25 anos, movendo o Brasil para gigantes.
Olá, muito bom dia. Hello, good morning to everyone here with us. I am Amanda Gabriela, and I'm gonna guide you through the 6 days of lectures, activities in FLUB 24. It's an honor to be with you here, so we can dive into this life of Beatriz Nascimento, the Sida brings a lot of deep experiences to us, and we leave this place feeling so good. This book of experiences has aims at promoting these exchange of experiences, highlighting these prominent figures for our society, such as Beatriz Nascimento. She, who is a very enlightening person. So let's move on to the sixth day of activities. My production is there, my staff is there, doing the best they can to give you the best we can. It's very hard, it's a lot of work. We arrived to the sixth day of Fluke 24, opening the floor with this transatlantic intergenerational meeting. The main figures have reinvented the place for Black people and bringing their DNA this place of fighting, struggle. This panel will bring international guests. So for you to, follow everything, we have the phones, the headsets for simultaneous translation, and I'm gonna give you this information in English. Let's move on. The first to be here with us is the great grandchild of Nelson Mandela, Siyabulela Mandela, a real citizen of the world, PhD in politics, social science, and activist. Is the only living son of João Cândido, our second guest, who is fighting for financial reparation and historical justice that include the name of João Cândido and amongst the names of heroes of the country. And this should be obvious, but let's move on. Please visit the João Cândido exhibition here inside the Circo Voador. And empowering this meeting, journalist Tiago Rogero, who has been helping out with helping out with our gas legacy and inheritance. The Black man seen by himself, and our guest, who is a researcher and consultant for corporate programs, universities regarding gender studies, and was a secretary for human rights during Benedita da Silva government. It will be mediated by the executive secretary, Natalia Carlos, social assistants, and master from the Catholic University of Rio. Siyabulela Mandela came here invited by CDM, a partner of Flupi. So let's receive them with a lot of applause. Good morning. Good morning, Flupi. On behalf of the Institute for Defense of the Black Community, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity for this lecture, this panel, all our guests for this meeting. As the title says, this intergenerational gathering, transatlantic, for us to talk about our stories that are denied, and above all about the stories we are resuming, that we are retrieving and fighting for them to be visible. And this is about Beatriz Nascimento, our symbol. and the one we are paying tribute to in Floppy, who teaches us this. Her work, she is a historian and an intellectual that she teaches us a lot because she sheds light to this perspective of our lives that was denied during so much time. The black story, the black people's story was told from a certain perspective of a passive person, of a passive population, and she changes it. She brings this perspective of the fighting, of the struggle that was done by our population here. So she will shed light to the history of the African continent, showing how this diversified continent is in terms of social organization. And she will show us how these organizational forms and technologies that were brought here by our people from Africa, and how these things led to the creation of a quilombo. This is a concept that she really deals with in her work. And it's important for us to understand our story in Brazil from that perspective, the perspective of the struggle, of the fight, and not only being about being passive, from this passive standpoint. So it's interesting to be here in this panel and tell this story. And we have people that not only tells us the story, like Tiago Rogero, who has a very prominent work in terms of giving light to these stories, but also Mr. Candinho, who is the son of João Cândido, who built and led the story Vania, who is a very important leadership within the Black movement, building very important chapters of our story, and is here with us. So we are very happy to receive you all. Thank you for accepting our invitation for this conversation. And we would like to start with you. We have this honor to have you here. And please tell us how you think these stories that are denied, and for us in Brazil, this is still limited. Knowledge is limited in terms of how important it was to have this fighting for freedom, and when we were combating against, the apartheid, we had this first free election in South Africa, and this is something that we still don't know very well about. And Beatriz teaches us to dig into this part of history. So can you share your perspective with us, how you think that this story is important for us now? Can you bring this story to us right now?
Thank you very much. Brazil. It always feels like a homecoming whenever I am in Brazil. It feels like I am at home. Perhaps I should begin by extending gratitudes to my fellow panelists, esteemed members of the Brazilian community. And equally so, extend gratitudes to the audience for joining us on what I think will be a very informative and thought-provoking conversation. And to the organizers of this wonderful event, I would like to extend gratitudes for the invitation. And of course, more importantly, our collaboration with IDPN and the amazing work that they do in criminal justice system and transforming the criminal justice system here in Brazil and fighting for social justice as well. So gratitude for them for inviting me and for collaborating with us. One of the things that I think are of critical importance to highlight is the fact that throughout history, it is evident that despite the distance we have as a result of our geography, our forefathers and foremothers were united in their struggle to fight against different forms of injustices and different forms of discrimination and racism that were directed to the Black community from the era of slavery to the era of colonialism. They were always united. And I think as we have this conversation, I am actually reminded by the speech by Malcolm X in the late 1960s, early 1960s actually, where he was actually emphasizing on the importance of building bridges between the black community in the United States, in South America, with the black community in Africa. It was of critical importance that if the people of color, if the African people, if the black people are to be free from all these different forms of injustices, it is only through the bridges that we build, it is only through our united force and the solidarity that we should have as the black community, as people of color, people of African descent. It is only through that unity, it is only through that solidarity that we can actually attain our freedom, that we can actually defeat the frontiers of injustices, the frontiers of oppression. And one of the things that I've started to notice, especially with this generation of ours, is that there is a disjuncture and the lack of connection, and there isn't even any talks about building bridges between Africa and South America, or between the African American community in the United States and Africa. It is true that enables those who are adamant in their attempt to oppress and perpetually relegate us into perpetual servitudes and modern slaves, if you call. It is because of the lack of connectivity, the lack of link, the disjuncture between the African communities in the African continent and even here in South America. If you have noticed, the previous generation would tell you from the T what was the apartheid regime all about in South Africa. If you ask any senior citizen of Brazil, our esteemed guests, they'll be able to articulate to you what the apartheid regime was about in South Africa, what colonialism was about in South Africa. They'll equally be able to articulate what strategies and tactics they employed in collaboration with the liberation movement in South Africa that would then later usher South Africa to the dawn of democratic dispensation. It is because of that shared values and the realization that it is only through the collective efforts of Africans in the African continent and people of African descent here in South America or in the United States that we will be able to attain freedom in Africa, in South Africa and other parts of the African continent where oppression reigns supreme, where discrimination, where systemic racism and injustice reigns supreme. So it is only because of that collective will of the people of African descent in this part of the world, in collaboration with the African people in Africa, that today I am able to sit here as a living testimony that there is actually power in our solidarity, in our humanity, and there's actually power in our collective and shared will as people of African descent. Only if we come together that we will be able to devise strategies and tactics that will lead to the freedoms that our people yearn for. It was, for me, as an individual, I was absolutely shocked when I visited Brazil for the first time, probably 3-4 years ago. And I went across different favelas from Sao Paulo to Floripa to Rio. And I came to understand that the systems of injustice, the systems of oppression were actually the same wherever they were implemented in different parts of the world. When I went to the favelas, I saw myself in the eyes of the people who were living in the favelas, because our people were relegated in such inhumane conditions of living. When I come to Brazil, I don't see anything different except maybe color or even language. The injustices that we are experiencing under the skewed systemic racism that is so prevalent in the institutions and structures here in Brazil is identically similar to how the apartheid system was actually implemented in South Africa. The spatial development, you look at the favelas, you look at the suburbs here, precisely identical and the same to what it was in South Africa. So in other words, the very same system of oppression that they used in South Africa, they used it here. They used it in the United States. How was it possible for them to apply such a vicious and violent system? It's because of disunity, divide and conquer. The fact that we are unable to come together as the people, as the oppressed people, it enables the systems of oppression. How it was engineered, it enables to continue regardless of the time in which it is in operation, because there's a lack of connectivity among the oppressed people in different parts of the world. It is for the first time that even me, when I start to converse and engage in discussions here in Brazil, I constantly ask, how often do you connect with your fellow brothers and sisters in Africa? How often do you connect with South Africa? So that you can hear the stories of how the injustices of oppression have been implemented, how the systemic oppression and violence has been implemented in the African continent, and what kind of strategies and tactics we've adopted to fight against such a system, and how you could leverage on such strategies and tactics to make sure that you don't have generations yet to come, don't have to go through the same injustices and the same systemic violence and the same systemic oppression embedded within our institutions that our esteemed father and mother have went through. Unfortunately, today, what they went through is what we are going through, precisely because of that lack of solidarity between the oppressed people in different parts of the world. In their generation, that was completely different. They knew who Mandela was. They knew what Mandela was fighting against. They knew Mandela's people and the pain and the injustices that they were going through. Thus, they saw a need to stand in solidarity with the people of South Africa, to march in the street for Mandela and his people to be freed. They understood what was the mandate of their generation. Perhaps the lack of a collective understanding of what is our mandate as this generation enables us to be continuously be relegated in the state of perpetual servitude, to be oppressed and systematically oppressed in the manner in which we are being oppressed today. When I look at much of systemic racism embedded and oppression embedded in the structures here in Brazil, I say if they had maintained contact with South Africa, perhaps much of what is happening here wouldn't have happened today. Because we went through that and we learned it from you on how to fight such an injustice. Now we are free people, perhaps to a certain degree, free of much of the oppressive system embedded within your institution. But had you maintained contact, now this is not a blame on the side of our brothers and sisters on this part of the world, and also on us, had we continued to build those bridges, perhaps our people wouldn't be going through the same injustices as they are going through today.
Muito obrigada, Mudiba.
Thank you, Mudiba. And I was, listening to you, and you, call us, summoning us for this solidarity that you talk about, because it produces power. And you started saying of how we have this older generation that knows about this story of struggle and fight in the African continent. And that's why we have our master, Vânia Santana, who is this person that summons us, that rescues us in the Black women movement and brings to us these stories when we chat, and always saying about the importance of our connection, the connection of the Black movement with the countries in Africa. And she highlights the fact that before we had this connection, and how this connection was important for us to have unity and solidarity, to exchange experiences and not make the same mistakes, improve the good things. So, Vanya, I'd like to pass the floor to you right now. Good morning, everyone here. All of you that are here, these humans that are deeply human and extraordinary. We are here in this panel. Such a wonderful moment and such provoking panel. And I'm very happy to hear you, to listen to you. You think about what I have been thinking for the last years. And I have always been thinking about these things you said. Because once more, I had the opportunity to hear from the African leadership, the African youth, and this has been very special. And I want to tell you something, and to all of us here. And I wanted to thank you for the invitation. Thank Floop for being here in this panel, and say good morning to Tiago, Candinho, Natalia, because it's very important for us to have moments such as this ones of reflection, collective reflection. And what I wanted to say to you specifically, it's very important that the Black movement in Brazil, the Black intellectuality in Brazil, has been, in past, deeply connected with the anti-colonialist movements in Africa. This is part of the active history, political story of the Black movement nowadays. And I'd say that it is impossible for you to analyze the contemporary trajectory of the Black movement in Brazil without noticing the connection that these movements have had connected to this fight against colonialism in Africa, especially against Portuguese colonialism and our involvement in the liberation processes in Mozambique, Angola, Guinea-Bissau. This is our part. If you don't recognize this, it's because you have ignorance, because you don't comprehend and understand how big it is for the activism in Brazil, the Black activism in Brazil. And I'm going to give you an example, which is very concrete and objective about this. We are from this generation, Olodum centralizes our great musical group, Olodum. It centralizes Africa as a theme, as a result of this debate of the 80s, that Africa is our Africa. The colors that they selected to use to mean Olodum, to convey their identity, are the Pan-Africanism color. So it's, stupidity to imagine that the Black movement in Brazil was always, has always been guided also by civil rights in the United States. Does not correspond to the reality. And one of the important issues regarding this solidarity connection and political view has always been the fight against apartheid, because this was the paradigm. South Africa has always been for us a paradigm, because the question was how much Brazil sees itself in the United States and in South Africa. And there has never been a doubt in that moment in the 80s that we could identify in our favelas a representation of the ghetto, South African ghetto. And what I mean is that language, from my standpoint, the colonial power, and I won't even say that it's neo-colonial or imperialist, created these barriers, which are political barriers, and they are real. Language is a political barrier. It is a political barrier. And when I look to the connections that the Black movement had with Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, and other places, this is explicit. But the political experience of the apartheid is so recognizable and similar to our fight that we brought this debate to ourselves about the apartheid. What I ask to the new generations, because they have to learn it all over again, because it's not good, it's not working. We have people that thinks that it's good and thinks that the situation is bad. You know, I have worked in this fight for more than 40 years, and I know, I come from this political activism, and I am authorized, and I authorize myself to say that it's not good. And it's not good, especially because they think that these historians that talk about solidarity should not be taken into account when we debate. And by knowing Lelia and Beatriz as I knew them, because I think I knew them, I saw them, I lived with them. So there are things that are sad about them and from their perspective, and they would go mad about them, they would be very upset, and they would reply to these things like really irritated, and I am even embarrassed about what they saying about them, because these people were Pan-Africanists, and today you can't even associate Pan-Africanism to the thoughts of these two. I'm not even mention Abdias here. So where are we heading to? Because you summon people politically, If we don't go back to our history, to our memory, such as, João Cândido's memory. But it's essential, It cannot... we can't use this information, these memories, just to say that we are cooler, that we are better, not for that, not with that purpose. This is political action. That's what you're talking to me. That's what you're saying. That's why we are here in this rainy day, to know how what this game is about. Where is it standing? Not because, we have to take this to the university and for our PhD thesis. This does not make difference. The difference is in our political strategy for fighting. Because we have to fight. We have to fight. We have to have courage to go and fight. If you lack courage to die, you lack courage to live. And that's what Nelson Mandela did. That's what they show. Political life is made of contradictions, capitalism as well. So I'm very thrilled. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop here because we can move on with the debate. But I'm so happy to have such a young person that will come to and ask us, how does it work? how do you make unity? How do you create it? Because we have to agree on it if we want unity. Because we may think that we don't want unity because it's politically correct. We don't want this Pan-African unity. This does not interest us. This won't take us anywhere. We might decide on it, but we have at least to discuss about it. And the last thing I want to say is about Pan-Africanism is I'm the member of the Black Coalition for Rights, gathering a lot of institutions in Brazil, Black institutions in Brazil, created in 2019. Last year, we went to this meeting of the Afro-Descendant Forum of the United Nations. And I'm a person that, because of my life, my trajectory, my journey, I've been to many international forums, where you sit down and, discuss even the each word of, the declarations and say, I contributed to all of this written there. And it was very important for us to go to this forum last year. And it was amazing because the African countries made a lot of difference. They contributed a lot. The declaration is theirs. The African countries were amazing. And when the meeting finished, I said, Brazil is over, guys. One day in the past, the Black community in Brazil was political actor, minimally relevant, and it's not anymore. And it's very sad, but also very pedagogic, politically pedagogic, to recognize that Brazil is not in the front line of this liberation thinking of the African people, African descendant people. We can, try to change this, but we have to recognize the situation. And this was clear, absolutely clear last year during this forum. And we have this document that proves it, and a strategic and political document that I hadn't seen for so long, because there is a new generation in Africa. And I love this idea, and I have no problem admitting that we are far behind because we have to learn. Thank you.
Obrigada, Vânia.
Thank you, Vânia. Okay, so when we thought about this panel, we used to say exactly that how the history of your family that you are putting ahead, that you are bringing with you, is that comparing here with the Brazilian story, we have the acknowledgement of many national heroes that led fundamental fights for the liberation. And of course, you have the honor to have here with us Senhor Candinho. He is the son of João Cândido, and he will tell you a little bit more about the story of João Cândido, our Black Admiral, and together with the story of the Black movement that was already claiming, but it still contains a strong resistance. Candinho is fighting to have her father's name in the Brazilian book of heroes and heroines of the country, of the homeland. And some people from the Navy is against this. So Candinho, if you could tell us a little bit of this story. Good afternoon. Thank you for the presence of the great grandson of Nelson Mandela. It's an honor to be here at FLUP 2024, where we also have the exhibition on my father's life. João Cândido, that ended the whipped punishment at the time of his activity. I'm his only child, and it's an honor to represent him here. My father and Nelson Mandela are two world figures that made a lot to their countries to end the unhuman punishments that existed at the time. Brazilian Navy was the last one to finish with the body punishments that existed. The last Maria de Menezes was the last one to be whipped in public, and he received a punishment of more than 100 whips. So we had the revolt of the Mariners, and this was something that is in the history of Brazil eternally. And my father was the leader. Africa and Brazil, they unite themselves for their rights. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela fought for the human rights, and he spent 22 years in prison, if I'm not mistaken. And my father also, after the amnesty, he was arrested together with 18, and only him and a few others survived. When they left prison, they were very sick. Not enough, he was sent to the judiciary asylum, where my father was arrested for another period of time. Only in 2012 he was absolved. But not having the right of anything, he was excluded from the Navy. So the fraternity of the Preto Velho was the one that received him, welcomed him, and took care of him. But my father still loved the Navy. Even after all this suffering, he never lacked loving the Navy. He tried to work again in the Navy in Santa Catarina, but they wouldn't let him. And he didn't have any possibility to work in the Navy. So he ended up his last days working in the square here in Rio de Janeiro, selling fish, fishing and selling fishes. So we had a survey about his life and that he participated in this revolt. So the media started to be interested in this story, and they found my father at Praça 15 working, selling fish in the market. So today, Silvia Capanema, journalist and a politician in France, she also helped on this brilliant exhibition that we can see here in Cerco Voador. So I'm so grateful to all of you for your presence, for your invitation, and I like to say thank you very much to my family, to all my gratitude. Thank you very much, Senhor Candinho, Mr. Candinho. So I'm going to take the opportunity to listen to Tiago Rogero. Tiago Rogero is a journalist, and he's been developing a very important work, Quirino Project, that is a great reference to rebuild our history. So she is responsible for this project, and please, Tiago, tell us a little bit about it. And also share with us in which moment this key was turned about the importance of rescuing and retelling these stories, and how do you think this transforms? Thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, it's an honor to be here taking part of this panel with so many important references. I interviewed Mr. Candinho twice for him to talk about his father's life. It's a hero. And Professor Vânia, I have a lot of inspiration. And of course, with this wonderful representative of Mandela's memory, but not only this, it was a call for fight, what he said. I was so moved by all the discourses, and I'm writing down here so as not to forget. So my place is a place that I'm not so comfortable to be among the panelists. Usually I'm more comfortable making questions because I'm a journalist, I'm not a historian. I always like to highlight this. But in one of these events that Rio has as a FLUP, although FLUP is a more special event, but also an event open to public about literature, in 2018, I saw Conceição Evaristo in a panel mediated by Flávia Oliveira. I listened to her saying something that changed my trajectory. She said, they don't teach about the revolt of the Malays in the schools. And I knew that I was a black man, but understanding myself as a black man consuming literature regarding this movement. So I thought, I've read something, but I don't know too much about the Malays revolt. And of course, I knew a lot about the Farroupilhas revolt, for example, because there is a TV series and etc. Are there other stories that exist and I didn't learn? So maybe it was just I didn't get to know these stories. But this motivated me to develop journalistic projects based on these histories, on these stories. For example, about João Cândido, a story that has already been told, but it deserves to tell even more and retell the story about this Brazilian hero. So the education I had at school, for example, we have many teachers in Brazil that follow the law, that obliges the teaching of African and Afro-Brazilian history. There are many professors that follow this law, even before it existed. The Black movement does this for a long time. So the Black movement in the 30s, in the 1930s, were already predicting this importance. And also the Black activism promoted this kind of teaching, but the education that I had and that talking with other people, we know that we find out that it's the case also of so many others, was the longest period of Brazilian history showed the Black population only as enslaved persons, but they could exist in many other ways to build a quilombo, love, write, build a family, to learn how to write, to learn how to read. And this person also could achieve their freedom and become the first Brazilian woman to publish a novel. First Brazilian woman, not the first Black woman, Black Brazilian Muslim, but the first Brazilian woman. And it was in Maranhão, state of Maranhão, in 1879. And I didn't learn this story at school. For example, I didn't learn that Lamas was a wonderful lawyer that took a law in Brazil, one of the worst thing in Brazil, that was the legislation of 1931 that forbid the slaves traffic. So, but the Brazilians started to decide, no, we are going to continue because it's good for the elite. That was in 1831. And Luiz Gama take this legislation, and as a lawyer, he gets the freedom of hundreds of people. So that the person entered Brazil after 1831. When Luiz Gama dies, São Paulo City stopped. Like, for example, when we saw at the funeral of Getúlio Vargas, the city of São Paulo stopped for Luiz Gama's funeral. But usually, exception made to the teachers that really teach Afro-Brazilian history, but we know that the majority doesn't. So the ones that don't have these teachers never learn about that. And why is it important? Because the black child at school, they see that it can be anything they want. They have the opportunity to dream. The possibility of dreaming is denied for the majority of the population. That's why I believe so much in the idea of shared struggle. That's the way that we are going to put down the strongest identitary group in Brazil, that are the white people, that are also in the power, and they are going to continue in the power unless we have the shared struggle. And also, following what was said here, not only the Afro-Brazilian community, but also the other groups that are subjugated, but together with the African population, and remembering that this is not something happening now. This is something that the black movements in Brazil, they already reclaims this. So we have the book of Cairino project, is that many of the answers to deal with the problems that we face today, these answers are in the past, are in our elders, in our ancestors, and the knowledge that is inside our house and in the organizations. So we have to look at these responses. That's what explains how a country has enslaved a population, a people, for 150 years. And if we still have this situation, it's because we are not looking at this knowledge. We are not looking at this example of struggle that we produce for decades and centuries. Thank you very much, Tiago. So, Tiago talked about Luiz Gama, a national hero that inspired us. Among the black population, in our acting front line, we need to develop strategies of racial justice to face this injustice, right? To take off of the prisons our people. So when you talk about Luiz Gama, I was thinking about this partnership that we are building, about your availability and disposition to build as an institute of defense of the black population. This is strategic for social and racial justice. So I'd like to hear you. Why do you develop this interest of solidarity, struggle? But I'd like to take the opportunity to listen about your interest and your disposition of being here with us in Brazil from next year on to have this solidarity in practice. If you could share with us.
Thank you very much. Oh, God, Lord, I can hear myself in these earphones. Thank you very much. Once again, I'm inspired by the conversations that we have had from our elders, the experiences that they have shared, and the injustices of the past and how they've came to overcome these injustices. I'm equally so inspired by the clarion call that you have provided henceforth for us, particularly as this generation. And perhaps I think one of the things that are of critical importance and that inspires me as an individual to continue in this path of fighting for justice, advancing an agenda for human rights, and connecting dots and building bridges between the oppressed communities. It perhaps comes from the clarion call by Frantz Fanon, who argues that each generation must discover its own purpose, fulfill it, or betray it with a relative propensity. And the history has a clear track record of how the generation of Provinci, for instance, have defined with clarity what their mandate as a generation was. They dedicated their times and they've sacrificed as a generation so that our generation do not have to go through the similar experiences of the injustices of slavery, the injustices of colonialism. They were whipped, they were sent to prison, they were murdered for fighting for the limited freedoms that we are enjoying today as this generation. It is thus a clarion call to us as this generation to perhaps begin to reimagine and identify and define equally so with clarity what is our collective mandate as this generation. How do we build in the foundations that they have laid, which have ushered to the limited freedoms that we are enjoying today? And one of those things, it begins with perhaps looking at how does the current institutions that govern society continue to produce the similar results as they produced in the past. In South Africa, about a couple of years, 4 or 5 years back, as the younger generation, we had realized that the kind of the education system that we're fed in South Africa is one that was relegating us into perpetual servitude, basically training us to be the assistants of those who continue to engineer a system that seeks to oppress and suppress us as this generation. It continued to strip us of our own identity, of our own dignity. And thus, we saw a need to call for the decolonization of the education system so that the education system can be able to directly address the challenges that we face in these contemporary times while restoring the dignity back to our people. We wanted to see professors that look like us, that speaks the language, that had a shared experience of what our people went through. Much of our education system, and I would perhaps argue to a certain degree, even here in Brazil, it is very Eurocentric and American-centric in its configuration. It doesn't tell us of who we are as the people. And there's one thing that I have actually always adopted. If you do not know who you are, you would not know where you are supposed to go. If you don't know where you come from, it is easy for you to be confused on what is the way forward and what path should you forge to lead you into the promised land, if there is such a thing as a promised land. The kind of an education system that I received outside the formal education was one that always taught me that you are the descendant of King Ubenguka. You come from the Temple Kingdom. You rest in the shoulders of your ancestors. And my fathers and my brothers would ask me, who are your ancestors? I would tell them, my ancestors is Madiba Sopicho. Which is basically tracing my lineage from the first king to the contemporary king or leader that we have had in our kingdom. That becomes of critical importance so that whenever and wherever you are in the world, if there is anyone who mistakenly identifies you as a slave, you can tell them, I am a descendant of King Ubenguka. I come from the kingdom. That helps to be able to position yourself and ground yourself in your own history. If we as the people can begin to trace who we are and where we come from, there's no one that can relegate us into a perpetual servitude, or there's no one that can decide to indiscriminate against us. I speak everywhere I go. I travel in the United States, I travel in Europe, I speak with authority. Even if I meet the Duchess of Ladenburg, I can tell them that I equally so come from a kingdom. And if you come from a kingdom, you are able to understand the history of your lineage. It is that history that will point to the fact that you cannot allow yourselves to be oppressed, discriminated, and racially treated unjustly by a system. And your responsibility is to revolt at all costs. For you come from a lineage of those that have stood in the gap and those that have revolted against different forms of injustice. That is your role, that is your responsibility. And thus, it therefore becomes of critical importance when we create these bridges with the work that IDPN does, to be able to share our experiences and say, as South Africa, we come from a criminal justice system that was stewed along racial line, but we managed to transform that system to an extent that if you meet a policeman in South Africa, they would never treat you indiscriminately because of the color of your skin. If you go through the criminal justice system in South Africa, it is not populated only by black people. For our forefathers, our mothers and our fathers have worked and sacrificed so much to transform those institutions so that they don't treat us the same as they treated them. It is for that reason when we begin to build these bridges, it is that clarion call by Malcolm X that we must begin to build bridges. It is comes from that collective understanding of our history, that we owe our freedom not only through our collective power as South Africans, but through the solidarity from our fathers and brothers here in Brazil who were marching in the street in calling for our freedom, even at the time when it was not fashionable to do so. They stood in our defense. They stood united with us in solidarity. They marched in the street fighting for our justice, not only their justice, but our justice. Thus, it brings us back to this generation to say, what is our mandate? What strategies and tactics we ought to devise as this generation in order to usher our people from the shackles of injustice, discrimination, to the freedom that they deserve. If you can do it for us in South Africa, we can also help you to do what you have helped us to do. It is possible. It only begins by us coming together, sitting around the table and devising strategies and tactics on how best to transform our societies, the institutions that govern our societies, and how best do we transform our lives and restore the dignity back to our people. I cringe whenever I go to the favelas here in Brazil. I cannot believe that our people are still subjected in such inhumane ways of living. When I travel across the favelas, I see apartheid alive. And I cringe, for our people went through that similar experiences. The black on black violence is what our people went through. And those were the engineered systems by the apartheid, by the colonial regime. I cringe when I see such an injustice to continue in this day and age. It speaks to the lack of inaction, the inaction on the side of us as this generation. It cannot be that we allow apartheid and systemic violence and systemic discrimination to exist in this day and age. When our forefathers and foremothers have sacrificed their lives for the freedoms that we're enjoying today, perhaps we are over obsessed with Instagram and Twitter and social media. And we forget to identify these systems at our disposal as an opportunity to build bridges, solidarity, to strategize on how best can we usher our people towards the promised land. That will be my view, that will be my take, that will be my submission, that will be my clarion call to this generation, and to say, perhaps we need to begin thinking on how best do we build bridges and continue the fight for justice, freedom, and liberty for our people.
Muito obrigada, Martinho. Bom, e aí eu vou seguir aqui, passando para a nossa mestra mais uma vez, porque ela também fazia essa chamada, essa convocação. Então, Vânia Santana, qual é o nosso mandato? Qual é a nossa missão? Qual é a missão dessa geração?
Eu acho que tem uma força das palavras, e uma das forças das palavras é... Eu acho que não...
And I think there is no problem when we're in this situation or such a panel, you know. I think we've been through so many other panels and recognize that in this panel, there is a leadership. It's your leadership. I'm learning a lot with you this morning. And one of the lessons is this word, what's our mandate? Maybe in your relationship with the Institute, I sincerely hope that you can create this institutional bridge, and it may be very good to the institution, to the African fight, and to the Brazilian fight. I think this is the way to learn and try to place this world mandate in the sense of saying, what's your mission? What are you here for? What do you stand for? What are you prepared for? And I think that the mandate now, reflecting about what has been said, I think the mandate is this African connection, this diasporic connection, this global black Afro-diasporic connection. There is no other way for populations, enslaved populations, than unity. That's why this mild and non-sufficient debate around reparation is something that politically mobilizes me. If you have worked in the coalition, you know that I've been saying this a lot. So even for an activist, and it's right, it's okay that what the movements, black women movement have been doing, even if we have centralized this fighting for rights for the black population, and this is our national mandate, even if I see just small advances, these won't be enough for fighting the 21st century battle. It's not enough, definitely. And if you should have any doubt about it, just, pay attention to the tentacles of fascism that is advancing globally. Fight against fascism. It's a close cousin. It's not a far cousin. It's a very close cousin of the fight against the anti-racist debate. It's a neighbor that we know well about, close neighbors that have been, close to each other for a long time. There is a movie that I love, Die White Season, about the injustice system in South Africa. And it has Marlon Brandon, and he's playing a lawyer, white lawyer, that is always called when very complicated cases in South Africa around apartheid have to be judged. This is an amazing film, Die White Season. And there is a moment in which he says, he loses in court, and he says, in South Africa, law and justice are for cousins that don't see each other very often. Just, to create this comparison. Faces and racial theories are not distant cousins. So what I see is that the 21st century will bring to us a challenge in terms of fighting against racism, xenophobia, and all sorts of intolerance as an articulated step that is mandatory, essential. We won't come out of this situation alone. And I see that our African heritage, this group that was definitely enslaved and subjected to all sorts of colonizations and imperialism, they need to get together and unite. I see that this mandate today is to create these political bridges. In our case, in Brazil, we have a challenge that is bigger because the country's political forces do not recognize the critical thought, the critical thinking of the Black movement and of the Black intellectual community. Our elite in their progressive field sectors are not convinced that we have a project for the country, for the nation. And this is a political problem and very severe. The fact that we are not, and this is a problem with our mandate, the fact that Black people are not recognized as political subjects will prevent us greatly of being the ones who are, calling to themselves the responsibility to exert the mandate, to act the mandate. But it's no problem, this is part of the political struggle. I don't see it as a problem at all. What I think is the real problem is that we don't have concentration and we do not elevate the racial conscience in Brazil. The Black people need to be reminded all the time. They need to be reminded constantly that they are victims of racism and discrimination. This is our role, in my opinion. So you have this mandate in terms of articulation, strategies, and this is an invitation, a good invitation. I like this party, I'm gonna try to, be present in this party. But we have a task, a very strong one in Brazil internally. And I ask you to please contribute to it, together with other progressive forces in Africa. I think it's going to be very interesting. And finally, since we are very close to our November 20th, since I am proud of being born and raised in the city that celebrated the first November 20th as a holiday in the city. It was a very important political action from our consular, a very young one, Edson Santos. People need to know who he was. His mandate as a consular, Edson Santos, at that time affiliated to PCdoB, the Communist Party, competent. His office made so that November 20th would be a holiday. I usually say two things about this. This holiday has an extraordinary name. National Day of the Black Conscious, Zumbi dos Palmares. National Day of Black Conscious. Black Conscious National Day. It's a lot for us, a name, you know. It's not like any other holiday. This is the, National Day, the Black Conscious National Day. It has always been like this. And another important thing is to say is that it is the only one now national holiday, civic holiday in the country. It was, achieved on the streets, stopping the cities. It would have been easier, coming from the government with just a signature, but we took more than 30 years to get to it, for a group that lacks, money, that was enslaved, to get to this Black Conscious National Day, Zumbi dos Palmares. This is to, this is to make a quilombo, because it's not the National Day of Zumbi. This is the National Day of the Black Conscious, Zumbi dos Palmares. The memory of our resistance and of our quilombo. This is deeply political, deeply philosophical, and only the African knowledge can allow us this political construction today. Thank you, Master. Always inspire us, but it is telling me that I need to conclude, So, just to move on to our final remarks, I'd like to ask Candinho to leave us a message, what us as generation, have as a mission, to move on, with respect to your father's legacy and the legacy of what so many others, as we said today. First of all, people have to, unite in general, and also the parties, because the Black community in Brazil has always been disregarded, and in second, the second is in importance. And we have to unite ourselves regardless of the color, to stop it. And the country will to be recognized worldwide as a country that was explored, enslaved, and until now, we are not actually free from slavery. The mighty ones are still there, exploiting the poor ones, and we have to stop this, because the country cannot move on this way we are right now. So my father, since he was the last resistance in Brazil during slavery, after 8 years, 1880, we had the layout, yeah, and in 1808 was when Princess Isabel abolished slavery in Brazil, but slavery still exists differently. It has always existed, so we need to unite, to get together, in terms also of parties and in general, to stop this colonial phase, you know. Brazil was already enslaved. This thing has to be, you know, has to end. That's what I have to say. My father, when he was saying some words at Praça 15, and I was there, they asked if he had to, to create another uprising, another revolt, he would. And he said yes, he would do it if he needed to. So he was a person that really put a lot of effort in. He was never whipped in his life, but he wouldn't admit it that his colleague would, this type of punishment and torture. It's really embarrassing, you take people's clothes out, you undress that person, and come someone, someone else and give you so much lashes, How can you bear such a punishment? So this was the only solution he could do. He didn't want to bomb Rio because at that time we were the capital of the Republic. He only wanted to end up that sort of torture. It did. He achieved it, but then he had the consequences, which were terrible for all that participated at it. And they bombed the Navy without the participation of the sailors. But this was the reason for having this situation stopped, and the sailors were killed. There was this ship that went to Amazon. Many sailors were killed in the sea, while they were crossing. And my father was there. My father was put in this dungeon, as I said before. So my father has always been against it, and he was exiled, and you didn't have access to conversation and what was going on. But he did that not because he wanted to be a hero. He did it because he was a citizen, because he was not accepting that he was never lashed or whipped. And people usually, if you don't suffer that kind of treatment, you really don't care about the ones who suffer, But he cared, and he was chosen to take command of that ship, to command the movement. And this movement went on. And now the stories about my father are told everywhere, here in Brazil and abroad. And I thank you the participation of all of you in this place. And please move on with this movement. Go on, because the punishment arrives differently, but it arrives. Good morning. Good afternoon already, right? I'd like to greet the whole panel, Tiago, Mandela, Natalia, Candinho, and Professor Vânia. And I have the pleasure to call Professor Vânia as Vânia, because we already know each other. We were colleagues in high school. And I'm going to introduce myself because my aunt asked me to do so. I am Beatriz Nascimento. I'm a geologist, son to Mother Solar, Emanuel do Nascimento. grandson of Rubina and Xavier Nascimento. And I'm the nephew of Beatriz Nascimento. It's the first time I come to FLUP. It's a great pleasure. I'm the nephew of Beatriz Nascimento. I want to thank you all on behalf of my family and say that in 2022, together with my wife was here, Cláudia Nascimento. My son is also here. In 2022, I teach at the Fluminense University, the Federal University, and we decided to start something very challenging. Demand the Doctor Honoris Causa title to Beatriz. And the university has never considered such title to a black woman, so we faced this challenge. We faced a lot of struggle. There was this thing of being able to have a commission to move forward with this. I dismissed the commission because I didn't want any help to talk about my aunt because I lived with her, just as Vanya and some other people here. So we demanded the title, and in 2022 it was approved and released in the same year. So Beatriz Nascimento is the first black woman to receive the title of Doctor Honoris Causa by the university. From this title, a project was created. Project Reflections from Beatriz Nascimento. And it's in second edition. I'm Cláudia Nascimento, a writer. I directed the first Black students movement, and Beatriz founded this movement together with Marcele Cunha. And this is an honor to be here, the second time now with my family. And I wanted to say something because we have to, make visible our bodies. We cannot just sit down, We have to say who we are, what we are doing here. And I was awarded some prizes because of projects in basic schools, and I was one of the first teachers to talk about the law and about Beatriz, so my students at school know about her. So this INFIS project in its second edition was performed last week, and we decorated the universities and the schools, and that's it, not only through speech but also aesthetically. And to conclude, I'd like to reinforce Vanya's speech regarding Black movements issues. And it's no news that Vanya, she has this whole huge journey, long journey, and I'd like to reinforce this thing. If you knew Beatriz, Lélia, many things are said that are not true. And we are really embarrassed, And there is this generational cliff that we have to work on still. And when I arrived here and I see Vanya, we're still in the fight. There's this cliff, and we have to work on it. And from Beatriz's perspective, it's the Atlantic issue itself. The Atlantic to her was not this only poetical. The Atlantic was some sort of an obstacle that should be overcome through a connection. And it's a very thin line that connects, a thin thread that connects the diaspora, the Black here in Brazil, in Africa, in the Caribbean region. All of them are connected with this thread, and it has to be strong to overcome this cliff. And we're living a cliff and a gap, generational gap now. So it's important to rescue this. Just to remember the André Rebouças group was the one who created the week for studying the Black contribution to the Brazilian culture. And the first edition of this week was in '75 during the dictatorship. And then we, continued. I was a little girl. Other people were there participating in the group, and were getting together. We stopped our activities a little bit after she died, but now we're trying to reorganize our documents and start again and put the group into action. So it's important for you to know that the first collective at this university was ours, and we are honored because of that. Thank you. Thank you for, enlightening our conversation with your presence, words. Well, so we need to conclude the panel, unfortunately, but Tiago, I wanted you just to feel comfortable to, comment on all the things that were said, and also talk about your book that you just published, Project Quirino, this Afro-centered look at the history of Brazil. Please share it with us. I'm going to be brief. First of all, thank you all coming here in this rainy morning. It was a lesson to all of us. It's an honor to be here on the stage with them. For the book, if you ever heard of it, it's an expanded version of the podcast. It's not a transcription. There's a lot of news. You can start reading the book. It's been sold here, and you can come for me for autographs. It's a research. It was a result of 7 years of research for the first phase of it. A group that was basically Black, more than 40 people. I'm a journalist, but we also received help from Inai Lopes, historian, an amazing team in the backstage. So regarding the discussion, I think I cannot add up anything because it was all amazing. And something that I like to think about is that naturally Black people, we have to be connected with these issues and debating among us. But I like to think and talk about the responsibility of white people in all of this. Racism is promoted in large scale by white people because they are the beneficials of this. They benefit from it, and not only promote, but they let it happen. So I think it's really important to mention it. Not only see things happening and not doing anything, There is this story that we talk about, this woman that was taking care of people, and she receives through WhatsApp a group, someone saying that they needed, women for a specific job, but they didn't have to be nor fat nor Black. And this was, this vacancy was being, sent through WhatsApp by this agency, which is a white woman in this huge agency, very famous one. And the other people that were, forwarding this message in WhatsApp groups were white. And the only person that opposed it was a Black one. And she had everything to lose. She had everything against her. You know how it works in Brazil, You were losing job opportunities, but she did not accept that, even though she, and she reported it to the police, and the police amazingly decided to investigate it, and they started this, process. They sued the agents and the woman. You can imagine the Brazil, was, because it is always the same in Brazil. And I was thinking about all the white people that signed and didn't do anything. So this responsibility of, ending racism in Brazil is also theirs, because they're the ones benefiting from it, and then let it happen and then perpetuate it. So, and for the rest, I want to thank Floop and my colleagues here. And that's it. I think we will never end this conversation because we are summoned to go and act. So let's meet ourselves in this fight for racial justice. And I'm going to invite you all to follow what we're doing, the Black Community Institute, at Instituto DPN. And please follow us, So thank you for your attention. Congratulations to Flu because it's amazing.